Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating text by Professor Ibrahim Abdallah Salkini. And honestly, it challenges one of our deepest modern assumptions. I mean, think about it. Most of us just walk around believing we're the freest human beings in all of history, right? After all, the physical chains of the past are mostly gone. But this source material, it argues something radically different. It actually proposes that slavery hasn't disappeared at all. It's just evolved. We're going to be looking at the concept of modern intellectual enslavement, how our minds, our loyalties, and our spiritual agency are literally being captured without us even realizing it. All right, let's just dive right into this.
So, are we actually free? The author uses this strikingly powerful metaphor, the modern slave market. Just imagine walking down the street and seeing a modern, educated person voluntarily putting on chains, modifying their appearance, adopting behaviors they don't even fully understand, just to fit into a predefined box. If you ask them why, they'd probably get super defensive. Well, the text argues that we do this intellectually every single day. We willingly walk into these modern slave markets where the currency isn't money for physical labor, but our loyalties, our clicks, and our outrage.
You see, back in the day, a slave market traded in physical bodies. The master was a single, identifiable person demanding physical obedience. But in the modern slave market, the chains are invisible. They're entirely psychological. We're trading our intellectual independence and our spiritual agency over to institutions, to social groups, and ideological tribes. The master is no longer just one person. It's this incredibly complex system designed to keep us compliant and unquestioning, all while convincing us that we're acting totally out of our own free will. Crazy, right?
Okay, here's how we're going to break down the author's arguments today. First, the illusion of freedom. Second, partisanship as the invisible chain. Third, modern idols. Fourth, the anti-partisanship paradox. Fifth, enslaved by custom. And finally, number 6, the dividing line.
All right, starting with section 1, the illusion of freedom. Basically, while we don't have that physical bondage anymore, our true freedom, that liberation from earthly idols and societal pressures, has really been hijacked by some highly organized modern systems.
Moving on to section 2, partisanship, the invisible chain.
So how exactly do we get captured? Well, it happens through Asabiyyah, or Zealotry. Look, human beings have a natural, totally healthy desire to belong to a community. We all want that. But Asabiyyah is when that healthy desire gets hijacked and weaponized. It's this toxic zealotry where your loyalty to a specific group, idea, or person completely overrides your own intellect. You literally stop thinking for yourself. You stop evaluating right and wrong based on objective truth or scripture, and instead you just blindly align with whatever your tribe dictates. It is, ultimately, the complete surrender of your spiritual agency.
Which brings us to section 3, modern idols.
To see how this actually plays out in our daily lives, the author categorizes this modern fanaticism into 4 distinct avenues. First, we've got blind loyalty to groups, where the organization itself becomes way more important than its original purpose. Then, fanaticism towards individuals, turning human scholars or leaders into infallible idols. Next is the strange paradox of anti-partisanship. We'll get into that one in just a minute. And finally, submission to customs and traditions, basically just following the crowd. Let's look at exactly how the source maps all this out.
The original Arabic text here is incredibly structural in diagnosing the problem by literally mapping out these types of fanaticism, groups, individuals, anti-fanaticism, and customs. The author gives us a really practical diagnostic tool for our own lives. Like, are we falling into one of these traps? Let's explore that first one, loyalty to groups.
The text points out a really fascinating historical observation here. It notes that many Islamic movements started with incredibly pure intentions. For example, the author mentions the Salafi movement originally emerging just to connect people back to the Quran and Sunnah, and the Sufi movement emerging to strengthen inner faith and reach a higher level of spiritual excellence, or ihsan. But what happened? Well, as generations passed, these groups often devolved. Later followers completely forgot that original noble intent and became enslaved to the group identity itself. They started defending the group blindly, getting super tribal, and accusing anyone outside their circle of ignorance or deviance. The group literally became the idol.
And then we have the second trap, fanaticism to individuals. The author describes the absolute tragedy of followers who turn human scholars into modern idols. They get so obsessed with a specific religious figure that they copy the scholar's exact movements, their specific style of dress, even their personal habits. And in doing so, they completely forget the core example of the prophet, which is exactly what the scholar was originally trying to point them toward in the first place. They essentially become slaves to their affiliation with a human being,
That leads us to Section 4, the anti-partisan paradox.
Yeah, this brings us to what might just be the most ironic form of intellectual enslavement. The author calls this anti-madhabism, or the paradox of anti-partisanship. See, there are people who reject the traditional schools of Islamic jurisprudence, claiming that following a school of thought is a form of fanaticism. They say they're breaking the chains of tradition to be independent thinkers, deriving rulings straight from the texts. But the irony here is just staggering. By rejecting the traditional schools to avoid fanaticism, they end up becoming intensely, blindly fanatical about the opinions of a single, modern contemporary commentator.
And this leads to a pretty stunning point from the text. The author states that by rejecting the 4 traditional schools of thought, all in the name of unity and avoiding partisanship, we didn't actually unify the Islamic world. Instead, we created 1,000 new, highly polarized madhabs, or schools of thought. Why? Because everyone who claimed to be an independent thinker just ended up creating a new faction based on their own ego and personal understanding. So they escaped one supposed chain, only to forge 1,000 new ones of their own making. It's wild.
All right, Section 5, enslaved by custom.
Listen, if you aren't enslaved by a religious group or some charismatic leader, there is still one final trap waiting for you. It's the phenomenon of the blind follower. This happens when you completely surrender your intellect to the society around you or to the traditions of your ancestors. You just do what everyone else is doing, whether it's good or bad, right or wrong, simply to fit in. The text notes that people will passionately defend traditions that have absolutely no basis in intellect or religion, treating these cultural habits as if they were literally divine law. Make no mistake, this is a profound form of self-enslavement.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, the dividing line. So, the big question, how do we actually fix this? Well, the author is very careful to distinguish between natural affiliation and blameworthy partisanship. Natural affiliation is a healthy, conscious belonging. It's loving your family, your community, or your school of thought while still maintaining your objective sense of justice. Blameworthy partisanship, on the other hand, that's the toxic, unthinking zealotry. It's defending your group even when they are clearly, undoubtedly in the wrong. So what's the litmus test here? How do we diagnose ourselves?
The text provides 4 incredibly practical criteria to diagnose toxic zealotry in your own life. You really have to pay attention to what triggers your anger. First, are you getting angry to defend things that aren't even sacred? Second, are you getting furious over an issue where there is no clear, definitive textual proof? Third, are you fighting over texts that legitimately allow for different scholarly interpretations? And fourth, and honestly this is a huge one in the age of social media, are you just getting angry because someone else in your group is angry, even if you don't fully understand the issue yourself? If you answered yes to these, you are operating under Asabiyyah. You're wearing that invisible chain.
To break free from all of this, the text points us to a really profound prophetic hadith. It says, "Do not be a blind follower, saying if people do good, we do good, and if they do wrong, we do wrong. Rather, condition yourselves. If people do good, and if they do evil, do not do wrong." This is the ultimate call to spiritual and intellectual independence. You are commanded to have your own moral compass, totally independent of the crowd, the group, or the charismatic leader.
And really, that's the challenge this explainer leaves us with today. We all love to think we're these free, independent thinkers, but Professor Solkini's text forces us to actually look in the mirror. Are we trading our minds in the modern slave market of partisanship? Take a hard look at your affiliations. Look at what makes you blindly angry. So as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to reflect on. Which invisible chain of partisanship will you break today? Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the things you follow.